He inherited a ghost city no one wanted, Pripyat, the radioactive graveyard abandoned since Chernobyl's meltdown. An injured veteran, with nothing left to lose, discovered what powerful men had hidden in the ruins for decades. $290 million in gold, art, and secrets that would either save him or destroy him forever. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The fluorescent lights in the Portland VA clinic hummed like trapped wasps, flickering every few seconds, as if they too were suffering from some kind of post-traumatic disorder. Marcus Reed sat in the same plastic chair he'd occupied every Tuesday for the past 8 months. His left leg stretched out at an awkward angle, the metal and scar tissue beneath his jeans, reminding him with every pulse that some wounds never fully close. 34 years old, he should have been in his prime. Instead, he felt ancient, hollowed out, like one of those buildings you see in war zones still standing but gutted, the windows blown out, nothing left inside worth saving. The waiting room smelled like industrial cleaner and desperation. To his left, an elderly man with shaking hands clutched a worn Bible. To his right, a kid who couldn't have been more than 22 stared at the wall with eyes that had seen too much too soon. Marcus recognized that stare. He'd worn it himself for 3 years now, ever since the IED in Kandahar had torn through his Humvee, killed 2 of his brothers, and left him with 17 surgeries, a leg full of shrapnel, and nightmares that came every time he closed his eyes. His phone buzzed. Jennifer. Again. He didn't need to read the message to know what it said. Variations on the same theme she'd been playing for months. Sophie needs new shoes. The school is asking about field trip money. When are you sending this month's payment? The subtext underneath every word. You're failing as a father. You're failing as a man. You're failing. She wasn't wrong. Marcus had gone from Marine Corps combat engineer to unemployed mechanic in 3 years flat. The jobs never lasted. His hands still knew how to fix things, rebuild engines, diagnose problems other mechanics missed. But his mind would drift mid-repair. Suddenly back in Afghanistan, the smell of burning diesel in his nose, the screams of his dying friends in his ears. He'd drop a wrench, lose his train of thought, show up late because the nightmares had kept him awake until 4 in the morning. Employers got tired of it, gave him the same speech about understanding his sacrifice but needing reliable workers. The last shop had let him go 6 weeks ago. Since then, he'd been surviving on disability checks that barely covered rent on his studio apartment, eating ramen and whatever he could get from the food bank, watching his life circle the drain in slow motion. The nurse called his name. Marcus Reed? He stood slowly, gritting his teeth against the spike of pain that shot from his knee to his hip. The shrapnel shifted with movement, grinding against nerve endings, a permanent reminder that he'd left pieces of himself in the Afghan desert, and they weren't coming back. The exam room was identical to all the others he'd been in. Generic motivational poster on the wall. Sink, exam table, with that crinkly paper. The doctor, a tired woman in her 50s named Patricia, came in holding his chart like it weighed 50 pounds. "How are we doing today, Marcus?" "Same." She nodded, made a note. They went through the routine. Pain level 7 out of 10 on good days, 9 on bad. Sleep quality garbage. Nightmares every night. Suicidal thoughts. He lied and said no, because saying yes meant paperwork and phone calls and people treating him like he might explode. She adjusted his prescriptions, upped the pain medication slightly, suggested again that he try the PTSD support group. He nodded and lied, and said he would, knowing he wouldn't, knowing that sitting in a circle, talking about feelings with strangers, sounded like torture. "Marcus," she said gently, as he stood to leave. "You can't do this alone forever." "I know, but alone was all he had." Back at his apartment, a 500-square-foot box in a building that should have been condemned, Marcus sat at his tiny kitchen table and stared at the pile of unopened mail. Bills. More bills. Collection notices. His truck payment was 3 months overdue. His electricity had been shut off twice. He was 1 bad week away from eviction. On his phone, 17 unread messages from Jennifer. He opened the most recent one. "Sophie has a birthday party Saturday. She needs a present to bring. Can you send $50? $50. Such a small amount. Such an impossible amount." Marcus opened his banking app. Checking account balance. $43.17. Savings. 0. Credit cards. Maxed out at their $500 limits, which had seemed responsible when he opened them, but now just meant he couldn't even borrow his way out of poverty. He'd sold everything of value months ago. His tools, the good set his grandfather had given him when he graduated boot camp. His gaming console. His camping gear. Even his wedding ring. Though Jennifer had never asked for it back after the divorce. All of it gone. Traded for a few $100s that had evaporated into rent and food and Sophie's school fees. The apartment felt smaller every day. Walls closing in. No pictures on them, because he'd sold the frames. No TV, because he'd pawned it. Just a mattress on the floor, a folding chair, a rickety table, and the crushing weight of failure pressing down on his shoulders until some days he could barely stand. His phone rang. Sophie. He almost didn't answer. What did he have to say to his 11-year-old daughter when he couldn't even afford to send her $50? But he couldn't ignore her. She was the only good thing left in his life. "Hey, baby girl, Daddy." Her voice was bright, innocent, still believing that her father was someone worth looking up to. "Guess what we're learning in school?" "What's that?" "About Chernobyl. You know, the nuclear accident. It's so crazy. They had to evacuate this whole city, and now it's abandoned, and no one can live there for like thousands of years." Marcus's chest tightened. "That does sound crazy." "Yeah. And there's this city called Pripyat. That's like a ghost town. All the buildings are still there, but no people. Just empty. Like a zombie movie, but real. Sounds spooky. Are you okay, Daddy?" "You sound sad." "Too." God. She could always tell. Even through the phone. Even when he tried to fake it. "I'm okay, sweetheart. Just tired. Tell me more about school." They talked for 20 minutes. She chattered about her friends. About a boy named Justin who pulled her hair. About the art project she was working on. Marcus closed his eyes and just listened, letting her voice fill the empty apartment, pretending for a moment that he was the father she deserved instead of the broken man he'd become. After they hung up, he sat in silence. The sun had set while they talked. He hadn't turned on the lights, couldn't afford to waste electricity. The darkness felt appropriate. He thought about Patricia's question. Can't do this alone forever. No, he couldn't. But he didn't know how to not be alone. Didn't know how to reach out. How to ask for help. How to admit that the strong Marine who'd survived combat had been defeated by civilian life. The next morning, Marcus dragged himself out of bed at dawn despite having slept maybe 3 hours. The nightmares had been particularly bad, the same one he always had, where he was back in the Humvee, where he could see the IED but couldn't warn anyone in time, where he had to watch his friends die over and over and over. He limped to the mailbox in the building's lobby. More bills, probably. More evidence of his failure. He grabbed the stack without looking and was halfway back to his apartment when one envelope caught his eye. International mail. Return address. Volkov and Associates. International Legal Services. Kiev, Ukraine. Marcus stopped walking. Ukraine? He didn't know anyone in Ukraine. Didn't know anyone named Volkov. His first thought was scam some elaborate scheme to steal the nothing he had left. But curiosity got the better of him. Back in his apartment, he opened the envelope carefully. The letterhead was professional. Embossed. Expensive looking. The letter itself was typed in formal English, but with a certain stiffness that suggested translation. Dear Mr. Marcus Reed, it is our duty to inform you of the recent passing of Mr. Dmitry Reed, your father's second cousin, who resided in Ukraine until his death on August 4th of this year. According to Ukrainian inheritance law and Mr. Reed's explicit instructions in his last will and testament, you have been named as his sole surviving heir. Mr. Dmitry Reed's estate includes the following: legal ownership rights to residential property located at Apartment Block 7, Unit 42, Pripyat City, Chernobyl Exclusion Zone. Legal ownership stake in commercial property, specifically the Community Center building located on Lenin Street, Pripyat City. Personal effects and documentation currently held in secure storage. We understand this may come as a surprise. Mr. Dmitry Reed spent considerable effort locating you as his closest living relative. He left specific instructions that you be contacted upon his death and provided with full details of your inheritance. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to begin the inheritance transfer process. We must warn you that property located within the Chernobyl exclusion zone carries significant restrictions and responsibilities under Ukrainian law. Sincerely, Viktor Volkov, Esquire Volkov, and Associates. Marcus read the letter 3 times. Then he laughed, a short, sharp sound that echoed off the bare walls. This was insane. Someone was leaving him property in Pripyat? The radioactive ghost city Sophie had just been telling him about? The place that had been evacuated 37 years ago and abandoned ever since? This had to be a scam. An elaborate, weirdly specific scam, but a scam nonetheless. He crumpled the letter and threw it toward the trash can. It hit the rim and bounced onto the floor. Of course it did. But that night, lying on his mattress, staring at the ceiling where water stains formed shapes like inkblot tests, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about it. Dmitry Reed, his father's second cousin. He vaguely remembered his dad mentioning some distant relatives who'd stayed behind in the old country when the rest of the family emigrated. But that had been Soviet times, before Marcus was born. He'd never met any of them. Didn't know anything about them except that they existed somewhere on the far branches of his family tree. Could it be real? He grabbed his laptop, an ancient thing that took 5 minutes to boot up, and started searching. Dmitry Reed, Pripyat, Chernobyl Exclusion Zone, property rights. What he found made him sit up straighter, despite the pain in his leg. There were articles, academic papers, forum discussions among urban explorers and disaster tourism enthusiasts. Apparently, the legal status of Pripyat properties was complicated. When the city was evacuated in 1986, Residents were told they'd return in a few days. They left everything behind: furniture, clothes, family photos. But they never came back. The radiation levels were too high. The Soviet government eventually sealed off the entire area as an exclusion zone. But here was the interesting part. Many properties technically still had legal owners. The families who'd been evacuated but never formally relinquished their homes. Most had died over the decades. Some had sold their rights for pennies to speculators. But a few, a very few, had held on, maintaining legal ownership of buildings in a dead city, paying nominal fees to keep the deeds active. Why would anyone do that? Marcus dug deeper. He found a mention of Dmitry Reed in a footnote of an academic paper about post-Chernobyl property disputes. D. Reed, former engineer at Chernobyl nuclear power plant, maintained ownership of residential and commercial properties in Pripyat until his death in 2024. Motivations unknown. So Dmitry was real. The property was real. This wasn't a scam, or if it was the most elaborate scam in history. Marcus found one photograph online. A black and white image from the late 1970s showing a group of engineers standing in front of the Chernobyl plant. The caption identified several of them by name. Third from the left. Dmitry Reed, age 32, structural engineer. Marcus zoomed in on the face. The man in the photo was young, serious, with dark hair and intense eyes. And those eyes, Marcus saw his own eyes looking back at him. The same shape, the same expression of barely contained intensity. This man was family, actual family. By dawn, Marcus had made a decision that anyone in their right mind would have called insane. He was going to Ukraine. The plane ticket from Portland to Kiev cost $847. Marcus didn't have $847. He had $43.17. So he sold what little he had left. His toolbox, not the good one, that was long gone, but the backup set he'd been using for odd jobs brought him $150. His laptop ancient, barely functional, but still worth $75 to a pawn shop. His winter coat, his boots, his grandfather's old watch. The last thing of value his family had given him. It still wasn't enough. Marcus sat in his empty apartment, down to just a mattress and a folding chair, and did something he hadn't done in years. He called his ex-wife. "Jennifer, I need to ask you something. If you're asking for more time on the child support." The answer is no. Marcus. Sophie needs. I need to borrow money. Silence on the other end of the line. Then a bitter laugh. You need to borrow money from me. Marcus, you owe me $3,000 in back payments. You haven't sent anything for Sophie in 2 months. And now you want to borrow money. I know how it sounds, but I inherited something in Ukraine. If I can get there, if I can claim it, I might be able to. Ukraine? Marcus, are you having an episode? Did you stop taking your medications? I'm not crazy. There's a lawyer, Viktor Volkov. You can call him. He sent me a letter. My father's cousin died and left me property in Pripyat. Pripyat? The Chernobyl place. Marcus, listen to yourself. You can't even afford rent, and you want to fly to Ukraine to claim some radioactive shack in a ghost town. It's real, Jennifer. I researched it. The property exists. The inheritance is legal. This could change everything. For me, for Sophie, for all of us. Another long silence. Then her voice, softer now, sad rather than angry. "Marcus, I loved you once. I loved the man you were before the war. But that man is gone. You need to accept that. You need to stop chasing fairy tales and figure out how to be present for your daughter. Goodbye." She hung up. Marcus sat there holding the phone, feeling something break inside him. Not dramatically, not with tears or rage, just quietly, like the last bit of hope cracking and crumbling away. He was done. Finished. This was it. The final proof that his life had become unsalvageable. He looked around the bare apartment. Mattress on the floor, folding chair. Nothing else. The physical manifestation of his existence, stripped down, empty, barely functional. And then he thought about Sophie telling him about Chernobyl, about the ghost city, her voice full of wonder at how something could be left behind but still exist, abandoned but not quite gone, just like him. Marcus made a decision. He'd always been good at making decisions under pressure. It was afterward that he struggled, in the quiet moments when the decision's consequences piled up. But in that moment, staring at his empty life, he decided to bet everything on one last mission. He sold his truck, the one possession he'd been holding on to because he needed it for work, for getting around, for maintaining some shred of independence. He called every scrapyard, every used car dealer, every shady lot that bought vehicles with bad titles and worse maintenance histories. Finally found someone who'd give him $900 cash. Combined with everything else he'd scraped together, Marcus had exactly $1,312. The plane ticket was $847. That left him with $465 to survive in a foreign country, claim an inheritance, and somehow make it back home. It was impossible. Reckless. The desperate gambit of a broken man with nothing left to lose. So he bought the ticket. Sophie cried when he told her. They met at a park halfway between his apartment and Jennifer's house. Neutral ground. Sophie ran to him. All skinny legs and messy hair pulled back in a ponytail, and threw her arms around his waist. "Daddy." "Mommy said you're leaving again." Marcus knelt down, ignoring the screaming protest from his bad leg, and held her hands. "Just for a little while, baby girl. I have to go take care of something." "But why? Why do you have to go so far away?" Her eyes were watering, her voice breaking. "Is it because of me? Did I do something wrong?" No, sweetheart. Never. You're the best thing in my whole life. This is about me trying to make things better. For us. For our family. But we're not a family anymore. You and Mommy got divorced. You and I are still a family. We'll always be a family. And I'm doing this for you." She looked at him with those heartbreakingly honest eyes that only children have. "I don't need money, Daddy. I just need you to come back." Marcus pulled her into a hug, feeling her small body shake with quiet sobs, and made a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. "I'll come back. I swear to you, I'll come back." 3 days later, Marcus Reed stood in the Portland airport with a single backpack containing everything he owned, 2 changes of clothes, his medications, a folder with the inheritance documents, his passport, and $465 in cash. The flight to Kiev took 21 hours with layovers in Chicago and Frankfurt. Marcus barely slept. His leg cramped in the narrow economy seat. The pain medication wore off somewhere over the Atlantic, and he couldn't take more without risking running out before he even arrived. So he sat there, sweating through his shirt, jaw clenched, watching movies he didn't pay attention to, while his mind raced through all the ways this could go wrong. When the plane finally descended through grey clouds toward Kiev, Marcus pressed his face to the window. Below, Ukraine spread out in patches of farmland, forests, and scattered cities. Somewhere out there, maybe an hour's drive from the capital, sat Pripyat, the ghost city, the radioactive tomb, his inheritance. The airport was chaos. Signs in Cyrillic he couldn't read, announcements in Ukrainian and Russian, people pushing past him, speaking languages that sounded harsh and beautiful at the same time. Marcus had been in foreign countries before Afghanistan, Iraq during his deployments, but always as part of a unit, always with translators, always with a clear mission and support structure. Now he was alone. He found his way through customs, his hands shaking slightly as he handed over his passport. The officer looked at him, then at the document, then back at him, said something in Ukrainian. Marcus just stared blankly. The officer sighed and switched to heavily accented English. Purpose of visit, legal business, inheritance. Another long look, a stamp, the passport handed back. Welcome to Ukraine, a stamp passport handed back. Viktor Volkov was waiting in arrivals, exactly as promised. A thin man in his 50s with wire-rimmed glasses, a grey suit that had seen better days, and a nervous smile. He held a sign that read, Marcus Reed, close enough. Mr. Reed, I am Victor. Welcome to Ukraine. His English was formal, practiced, with a thick accent that turned W's into V's. I hope your flight was acceptable. It was long. Yes, very long from America. Please, we have much to discuss. My car is this way. They drove through Kiev in Victor's aging Lada, through streets lined with golden-domed churches, Soviet-era apartment blocks, and newer glass buildings that spoke to Ukraine's complicated present, caught between its past and its future, between East and West, never quite settled in either direction. Marcus watched it all blur past, feeling more disconnected from reality with every passing mile. What was he doing here? What had he been thinking? Victor seemed to sense his anxiety. You have questions? Yes? About inheritance? About your cousin Dmitri? A lot of questions. Of course. Let me explain as we drive. Your cousin Dmitri, he was unusual man, brilliant engineer, worked at Chernobyl plant before disaster. Was there the night of explosion? April 26, 1986. Helped with initial response, then was evacuated like everyone else. Marcus leaned forward. What happened to him? After. Victor lit a cigarette, offered one to Marcus, who declined. Most people who evacuated from Pripyat, they try to forget, move on, start new lives. But Dmitri, he could not forget. He moved to Kiev, got different job, but he kept going back, to the zone, to Pripyat, even though it was illegal without permit, even though radiation was dangerous. He paid fees to keep his property legal. Why? Why would he do that? Victor glanced at him in the rearview mirror. That, Mr. Marcus, is question many people ask. I was his lawyer for 15 years. I ask him many times. He never gives straight answer. Just says it was important. Says someone must remember. They drove out of Kiev, the city giving way to smaller towns, then to villages, then to nothing but forest. The road deteriorated, asphalt cracking and heaving, weeds growing through the gaps. They passed abandoned farmhouses, rusted tractors in overgrown fields, playgrounds where swings hung motionless in the still air. This area, Victor said, gesturing at the emptiness around them, was all evacuated in 1986. Not just Pripyat, many villages, many farms, hundreds of thousands of people lost homes. Marcus watched the abandoned buildings slide past. It reminded him of Afghanistan, not the desert parts, but the mountain valleys where war had driven people away, leaving behind the shells of their lives. They reached a checkpoint, a faded blue and yellow barrier across the road, the colors of the Ukrainian flag. A guardhouse with peeling paint. A bored-looking soldier with an AK-47 slung over his shoulder. Victor spoke to him in rapid Ukrainian, showing papers, pointing at Marcus. The soldier looked skeptical, walked around the car, peered in at Marcus, with flat eyes that had seen too much and cared too little. Finally, he waved them through. "Welcome," Victor said as they passed the barrier, "to Chernobyl exclusion zone." The forest closed in immediately, thick and wild. Birch trees with white bark, like exposed bones, stretched endlessly on both sides. The road was worse here, barely maintained, nature slowly reclaiming the asphalt. They drove slowly, carefully, the only vehicle on what felt like a road to nowhere. And then Marcus saw it. A sign, weathered but still readable, in both Cyrillic and English. Pripyat City, founded 1970, population 49,000. The population number had been crossed out with red paint. Victor slowed down even more. "We are here." They entered what had once been a thriving Soviet city. Wide boulevards designed for parades and May Day celebrations. Massive apartment blocks, 10 stories tall, stretching for blocks. A central square with a dried fountain. Shops with smashed windows. A cultural center with columns across the front. And everywhere, the green chaos of nature taking back what humans had abandoned. Trees grew through asphalt. Vines climbed walls. Moss covered concrete. The buildings stood like massive tombstones, marking the grave of a city that had died overnight. Victor parked in what had been the central square. He turned off the engine, and the silence rushed in. Complete silence. No birds, no insects, no traffic, no voices. Just wind moving through empty spaces, making a sound like the world itself was exhaling. Marcus stepped out of the car. The air smelled clean, but wrong, too clean, sterile, like a hospital. His boots crunched on broken glass and dead leaves. Above the buildings, he could see it. The Ferris wheel. Yellow and rusting, each car tilted at a different angle, frozen in place. It had been built for the May Day celebration in 1986, scheduled to open on May 1st. The reactor exploded on April 26th. The Ferris wheel never carried a single rider. It just stood there, turning into a rust-red monument to interrupted futures. "Your property," Victor said, pointing to a building on the north side of the square. "Is that one? Block 7, Unit 42, 4th floor. Also, your cousin had ownership stake in community center. 1 block east." Marcus limped toward the apartment building, each step sending pain up his leg, but he barely noticed. He was too overwhelmed by the sheer strangeness of this place. A city frozen in time. A city that should have been demolished, buried, erased, but instead was left standing as a warning. A memorial, a haunted house on a civilization scale. The building's entrance was a gaping mouth, the doors long since torn off or rotted away. Inside, the stairwell was darker than it should have been, lit only by gray light filtering through shattered windows. Graffiti covered every surface, messages in Russian, Ukrainian, English, Polish. Some were artistic, Some were philosophical, some were simple and heartbreaking. "We lived here. Don't forget us." They promised we could come home. Marcus climbed slowly, his bad leg protesting each step, his breathing heavy in the oppressive silence. Second floor, third floor, fourth floor, Unit 42. The apartment door was missing entirely, probably taken by scavengers years ago. Inside, it was like stepping into a time capsule preserved in decay. Furniture covered in years of dust, bird droppings, and decay. A couch with springs exposed. A kitchen table still set with plates, now coated in filth. The wallpaper was peeling, showing layers beneath flowered patterns from the 70s. Plain paint from earlier. A calendar on the wall, yellowed and brittle, showed April 1986. In the living room, Marcus found a television with its screen shattered. A bookshelf with books so mildewed they'd fused together. Family photographs still hung on the wall, a wedding photo. The couple, young and smiling. A child's school portrait. A group shot of people at a beach somewhere. These were real people. Real lives. They'd left thinking they'd be back in 3 days. 37 years later, their plates were still on the table. Marcus walked through the rooms, his throat tight, a pressure building behind his eyes that he refused to release. The bedroom, a bed frame, the mattress long since rotted away. The bathroom, a sink, a toilet, tiles crumbling off the walls. And the smallest bedroom, clearly a child's room, a little bed, stuffed animals on the floor, covered in dust and bird filth. A teddy bear sitting on the windowsill with one glass eye missing. He picked up the bear carefully. It was lighter than it should have been, the stuffing compressed by years of decay. Once, a child had loved this toy, had slept with it, played with it, probably cried when they had to leave it behind. During the evacuation, Marcus set the bear back down gently, reverently, as if it might still matter to someone somewhere. Victor appeared in the doorway. Difficult, yes, to see how people lived, how they lost everything. Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. "Your cousin Dmitri, he paid fees to keep this place legally registered for 37 years. Thousands of dollars, maybe tens of thousands, over that time. For what? For apartment no one can live in. In city no one can enter without permission. In zone that will be contaminated for next 20,000 years. There has to be a reason," Marcus said finally. Victor pulled a folder from his briefcase. Before he died, Dmitri left specific instructions. He said you must go to community center, to basement. He said you will understand why when you find it. Find what? He did not say. Victor handed Marcus a key, old, heavy, ornate, like something from a medieval castle or a Gothic novel. "This is for maintenance entrance of community center. Building is locked now, officially closed to tourists. But you are legal owner. You have right to enter." Marcus took the key. It was cold and solid in his palm, heavier than it looked. Victor checked his watch. "I wait outside. You go alone." This is what Dmitri wanted. He wrote specifically. Marcus must discover alone. He will know what to do. They walked 1 block east. The community center was larger than the residential buildings. A 2-story structure with imposing columns across the front, and a faded mural on the side, depicting workers in heroic poses, building something glorious. The paint was peeling now, the workers' faces cracked and weathered, their glorious future literally falling apart. Victor stopped at the base of the steps. "I wait here. Whatever you find inside, It is yours, your inheritance, your burden, your treasure, whatever it may be. Marcus climbed the steps, his legs screaming, his heart pounding. The key fit perfectly into the rusted lock. It turned with a grinding sound that echoed across the empty square. The door opened, and Marcus stepped into darkness. His flashlight, a cheap one he'd bought at the airport, cut through the gloom in a thin beam. The lobby was vast, with a curved ceiling decorated with communist stars and hammers and sickles. Propaganda posters hung in tatters on the walls, their slogans faded but still visible. Glory to the workers. We will build a better tomorrow. The future belongs to the Soviet people. The future had belonged to everyone but the Soviet people. As it turned out, Marcus found the stairwell leading down. Each step creaked under his weight. The air grew colder, damper, carrying the smell of concrete and mold, and something else, something almost chemical, like old machine oil. At the bottom of the stairs, a corridor stretched into darkness. His flashlight beam showed doors on either side. Storage rooms, boiler room, electrical room, all labeled in Cyrillic with English translations beneath. At the end of the corridor was a door that didn't match the others. Where the rest were wood or metal painted institutional green, this one was steel. New steel, not rusted, with a modern padlock hanging from it. Someone had been maintaining this. Marcus's hands trembled as he tried different keys from the ring Victor had given him. The first three didn't fit. The fourth one slid in smoothly, turned with a solid click. The padlock fell open. He pulled the door wide and shone his light inside. What he saw didn't make sense. While everything else in Pripyat had been consumed by decay, abandoned to time and radiation, and the slow reclamation of nature, this room was maintained. Clean, organized, almost pristine. Metal shelving units lined the walls, loaded with plastic storage bins. In the center of the room sat a desk with a battery-powered lamp, papers organized in neat stacks, and a framed photograph. Marcus approached slowly, each step feeling like walking on holy ground. The photograph showed a man in his 60s with gray hair and intense eyes. Eyes Marcus recognized from the old engineering photo. Eyes that looked like his own. Dmitri, standing in this very room, smiling slightly, as if he knew something the rest of the world didn't. Beside the photo was a letter addressed in careful English. To Marcus, read, my cousin, my heir, my choice. Marcus's hands shook as he picked it up. My dear Marcus, it began, if you are reading this, then you have come. Good. You were always meant to find this. Your father and I shared blood, but lived different lives. He went to America, seeking freedom. I stayed in the Soviet Union, then Ukraine, seeking truth. But we both understood that some things must be protected, must be hidden until the right person comes along. Marcus's breath quickened as he read on. What I hide here is not just money, though there is that. It is proof. It is justice. It is truth about what happened at Chernobyl, truth the government buried. I was engineer at plant. I knew what they did wrong. I knew who was responsible. I saved evidence. But there is more. In the years after the disaster, powerful men used chaos to hide their wealth. They moved gold, art, documents into the zone, thinking no one would look, thinking radiation would keep secrets better than any vault. I found their hiding places. I collected their treasure. And now, cousin, it is yours. Use it wisely. Use it for people who suffered. Use it to tell truth they tried to bury. Do not keep it all. Do not let greed consume you, as it consumed them. I chose you because I knew your story. I researched. I know you are veteran. I know you are wounded. I know you struggle. And I know that people who have suffered understand suffering in others. You will know what to do. In this room, you will find first cash. But there are more. 12 locations throughout Pripyat. I have hidden map in bottom drawer of desk. Each location contains part of the whole. Total value, $290 million. American currency. Give or take. I counted carefully. I waited patiently. I waited for you. Welcome to your inheritance, Marcus Reed. Welcome to your second chance. Welcome to the mission that will either save you or destroy you. Choose wisely. Your cousin, Dmitri. Marcus's hands trembled so badly, he nearly dropped the letter. $290 million. The words didn't seem real. Nothing about this seemed real. He turned to the metal shelving units. With shaking hands, he opened the first plastic bin. Inside, wrapped carefully in cloth, were gold bars. Small ones, maybe 1 kilogram each, but unmistakably gold. Real, heavy, cold. He opened another bin. More gold. Another. Jewelry, necklaces, rings, bracelets, all old, all clearly valuable. Another. Bundled cash in multiple currencies. Vacuum sealed to prevent decay. Another. Documents in sealed folders. Marcus stumbled backward, his bad leg giving out. He caught himself against the desk, breathing hard, feeling like the room was spinning. This was real. This was actually, impossibly, insanely real. He looked back at the letter. At the bottom was a crude, hand-drawn map showing the layout of Pripyat with 12 X's marked throughout the city. 12 locations. If each one contained even a fraction of what was in this room, Marcus slid down the wall until he was sitting on the cold concrete floor. His injured legs stretched out in front of him, his back against the wall, staring at a fortune in hidden treasure in the basement of an abandoned building in a radioactive ghost city. He thought about his empty apartment in Portland, about his $43.17, about Sophie's birthday party and the $50 he couldn't send, about Jennifer's voice saying he was chasing fairy tales, about the years of pain and poverty, and feeling like a complete failure, and now this. A hidden fortune, a dead cousin's final mission, a choice that would determine not just his financial future, but who he would become. The flashlight flickered once, reminding him that batteries don't last forever, that he was sitting in a basement in the Chernobyl exclusion zone, that Victor was waiting outside, that he had decisions to make, and not much time to make them. Marcus Reed, the broken veteran who had nothing left to lose, pulled himself to his feet. He put the letter carefully back on the desk. He looked at the fortune surrounding him, gold and cash, and secrets hidden in the shadow of nuclear disaster. And for the first time in 3 years, since the IED that shattered his leg and his life, Marcus felt something he'd almost forgotten: purpose. He had a mission again. And this time, he wasn't going to fail. Marcus didn't sleep that first night back in the cheap hotel 30 miles from the exclusion zone. How could he? Every time he closed his eyes, he saw gold bars wrapped in cloth, vacuum-sealed bundles of cash, and Dimitri's handwritten map with 12 X's marking locations throughout the ghost city. $290 million. The number kept circling in his mind like a vulture over a carcass. Too big to comprehend, too real to ignore. He lay on the thin mattress, staring at the water-stained ceiling. his leg throbbing despite the pain medication, and tried to process what had happened. 24 hours ago, he'd been a broke veteran with $43 to his name, contemplating whether it was worth continuing to exist. Now he was the legal heir to a fortune hidden in the ruins of Chernobyl. The universe's sense of irony was apparently as dark as his own. By 4 in the morning, he gave up on sleep. He pulled out Dmitri's letter and read it again by the dim light from the bathroom. The words that stuck with him weren't about the money. They were about purpose. Use it for people who suffered. Use it to tell truth they tried to bury. Dmitri hadn't spent 37 years maintaining ownership of properties in a radioactive wasteland just to collect treasure. He'd been documenting something, preserving evidence, waiting for someone who would understand. The question was, could Marcus be that person? Could the broken Marine who couldn't hold down a mechanic's job, who'd failed at marriage and was failing at fatherhood, actually finish what his mysterious cousin had started? He looked at the map again, studying the locations. The first cache, the one in the community center basement, was clearly meant as an introduction, a proof of concept. The real discoveries were waiting in the other 11 locations, spread throughout Pripyat. Marcus traced his finger over the map. The second X was marked at what looked like a school, the third at a hospital, the fourth at a gymnasium. Each building was labeled in Dmitri's careful handwriting with a single cryptic word: memory, pain, lies, hope. What the hell did that mean? By dawn, Marcus had made his decision. He needed to see them all, every location, before Victor or anyone else learned the full scope of what Dmitri had hidden, before word got out, before whatever this was became bigger than he could control. He called Victor at 7 in the morning. "I need to go back to Pripyat." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "You found something yesterday?" "Yes? In community center?" Marcus chose his words carefully. "I found personal effects, documents, things I need to understand better before we proceed with the legal transfer." Another pause. Victor was too smart not to suspect there was more to the story, but he was also professional enough not to push. "Very well. I pick you up in 1 hour. But Marcus, you must understand we cannot spend unlimited time in zone. Checkpoint closes at 5, and radiation exposure, even at low levels, is cumulative. We must be careful." "I understand." An hour later, they were driving back through the forest toward the exclusion zone. Morning mist clung to the ground, making the abandoned villages they passed look even more ghostly. Marcus watched the empty houses slide by and thought about Afghanistan, about villages they'd rolled through in Humvees, never knowing which ones were safe and which ones had IEDs buried in the road, waiting to tear through metal and flesh and lives. His hands started to shake. He clenched them into fists, fighting back the memory. Not now. He couldn't afford a panic attack now. Victor glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "You are okay, my friend. You look pale." "I'm fine. Just tired." They passed through the checkpoint. The same bored guard waved them through after Victor showed the permits. Then they were in the zone again. The forest closing in. The silence pressing down like a physical weight. Pripyat appeared through the trees like a mirage. In the morning light, the city looked different than it had yesterday, less ominous, more sad. Marcus could almost imagine it full of people. Workers heading to the plant, children walking to school, families going about their ordinary Soviet lives, not knowing that in just a few years their entire world would evaporate in the span of a single night. Victor parked in the central square. How long do you need? Marcus pulled out the map. A few hours. I need to visit several buildings. Marcus, I wait here. But please, be careful. Buildings are not stable. Floors collapse. Metal rusts. Pripyat kills people who are careless. Marcus grabbed his backpack. He'd loaded it with extra flashlights, batteries, water, and the pain medication he was going to need, and headed toward the first location, the school. Pripyat Secondary School No. 3 stood 3 blocks north of the central square. It was a massive concrete structure, typical Soviet design, functional, imposing, built to last forever. The irony was that it had lasted, just not in any way its architects had intended. The entrance doors hung crooked on rusted hinges. Marcus pushed through carefully, his boots crunching on broken glass. Inside, the hallway stretched long and dark. Classroom doors open on either side like missing teeth in a skull. He shone his flashlight into the first classroom. Desks still stood in crooked rows, some overturned, some still arranged as if students might return any moment. A chalkboard on the wall showed a half-erased math problem. Textbooks lay scattered across the floor, pages yellowed and brittle, the Cyrillic letters slowly fading into nothingness. Marcus moved deeper into the school, his leg protesting with each step. The pain was getting worse. He'd been walking too much, pushing too hard, but he couldn't stop. Not yet. According to the map, he needed the basement, southeast corner, custodial storage. The stairwell down was darker than the one in the community center. The walls covered in graffiti that ranged from philosophical to obscene. Someone had spray-painted in English, "We were children here. Now we are ghosts." The words sent a chill down Marcus's spine. The basement smelled of mold and decay and something chemical he couldn't identify. Water had leaked through the ceiling in places, creating puddles that reflected his flashlight beam like black mirrors. He picked his way carefully, testing each step before putting his weight down. The custodial storage room was at the end of a narrow corridor. The door was newer than the others, steel instead of wood, with a combination lock not rusted, recently installed, just like in the community center. Dimitri's work. Marcus tried different combinations based on dates, birth dates, death dates. The date of the Chernobyl disaster, 4/26/86. Nothing worked. Then he remembered the word Dimitri had written next to this location on the map. Memory. What memory? What date would Dimitri want him to remember? Marcus thought about the letter, about Dimitri researching his life, knowing his story, and suddenly, he knew his father's birthday. The connection between the two cousins. The reason Dimitri had chosen Marcus in the first place. He tried 3/11/47. March 11th, 1947. Click. The lock opened. Inside, pushed against the far wall behind old mops and buckets that were clearly props to disguise the space, was a sealed metal container. Marcus's pulse quickened as he pried it open. Paintings. Rolled canvases, maybe a dozen of them, each wrapped in protective plastic and carefully labeled with dates and artist names. Even with his limited knowledge of art, Marcus recognized some of the names: Kandinsky, Malevich, Chagall, Soviet masters, whose work was worth millions. A note was tucked inside, written in Dimitri's hand, stolen from Kiev, museums during chaos of 1986. Officials blamed looters. Truth. They stole themselves and used disaster as cover. Cowards. Keep safe, until truth can be told. Value: approximately $12 million. $12 million. In one location. And there were 11 more to go. Marcus carefully rewrapped the paintings and resealed the container. His hands were shaking. Not from fear or excitement, but from something else, a growing sense that this was bigger than money. This was evidence. Documentation. Dmitri hadn't just been hiding treasure. He'd been building a case. The second location was closer to the river. An apartment building, Block 14. According to the map, the cache was hidden behind a false wall in Unit 23, second floor. The word beside this location: pain. Marcus climbed the stairwell slowly, his legs screaming with each step. Halfway up, he had to stop and lean against the wall, breathing hard, waiting for the spike of agony to subside. And that's when the memory hit him. Afghanistan. The Humvee. The road outside Kandahar that looked exactly like every other road they'd traveled. Dusty, rutted, empty. He was in the back seat, checking equipment. Jackson was driving. Martinez was in the front passenger seat, making everyone laugh with a story about his sister's wedding. Williams was in back with Marcus, playing some game on a handheld console. The tinny music barely audible over the engine noise. Marcus had looked up from the equipment checklist and seen it a disturbance in the road ahead. Just a slight irregularity in the dust pattern, barely visible, probably nothing. But something in his gut, in his training, screamed wrong. He'd opened his mouth to yell a warning. The IED detonated before the words left his throat. The world became fire and sound and spinning metal. Marcus felt himself thrown, felt something punch through his leg like a giant fist, felt the Humvee flip. He hit the ground hard, rolled, came to rest on his back, staring up at a sky turned black with smoke. He tried to move. Couldn't. Looked down and saw his left leg bent at an angle. Legs don't bend. Blood pouring out. Shrapnel glinting in the meat of his thigh like jewelry. Then the screaming started. Not his, he was too shocked to scream. But someone else was screaming. Martinez. Maybe. Or Williams. He couldn't tell. The sound cut off abruptly, replaced by a horrible wet gurgling. Marcus tried to crawl toward the wreckage, toward his brothers, but his leg wouldn't work. He dragged himself forward with his arms, inch by inch, leaving a trail of blood in the dust. He reached the Humvee, saw Jackson still in the driver's seat, or what was left of him, saw Martinez on the ground, not moving, his body torn apart, saw Williams. Marcus jerked back to the present, gasping, his back against the stairwell wall in Pripyat, his heart hammering. Not now. He couldn't do this now. He fumbled for his medication, dry swallowed 2 pills even though he wasn't supposed to take them this close together, and forced himself to breathe slowly. In through the nose, out through the mouth, count to 4. Again. Again. Williams had lived. That's what mattered. Jackson and Martinez hadn't, but Williams had survived, got evacuated, got treated. Last Marcus heard, he was working construction in Arizona, married, had a kid on the way, alive. Not everyone had died. But Marcus had been the one who saw the IED, had been the one whose warning came too late, and that failure, that split second of hesitation, haunted him more than any physical injury. He pulled himself together, forced his breathing to steady, and climbed the rest of the stairs. Unit 23 was at the end of the hall. Inside, it was the same frozen decay as all the others. Furniture, personal effects, a life interrupted. Marcus found the false wall behind a wardrobe in the bedroom. It took him 15 minutes to figure out the hidden latch, But eventually, the panels swung open. Inside was another sealed container. This one held something different. Medical records. Hundreds of them. Children's medical records, specifically showing radiation exposure levels, cancer diagnoses, treatment failures, and attached to each record was a note explaining how the official statistics had been falsified, how cases had been hidden, how the government had systematically minimized the true cost of the disaster. Dimitri's note read, "Pain they tried to hide, suffering they tried to erase. These children deserved better. Their families deserved truth, value, beyond money. This is justice waiting to happen." Marcus sat on the dusty floor, surrounded by evidence of children who had suffered and died while their government lied about it, and felt tears burning in his eyes. Not the polite tears of sadness, but angry tears. Furious tears. These were kids, innocent kids who'd been sacrificed for political convenience. He carefully packed the records back into the container. This wasn't about money anymore. It never had been. Dimitri had hidden a weapon documentation that could bring down powerful people, that could force accountability decades after the fact. And now, that weapon belonged to Marcus. The third location was the old hospital. The building loomed against the gray sky like a concrete monument to suffering. Marcus had heard about this place. It was where first responders had been taken after the reactor exploded, where firefighters and plant workers had died horrible deaths from radiation poisoning, while doctors tried desperately to save them. The word on Dimitri's map for this location: the hospital was more dangerous than the other buildings. Floors had collapsed in places. The radiation levels were reportedly higher here because of contaminated equipment and clothing that had been left behind. Marcus moved carefully, testing each step, his flashlight revealing surgery rooms with equipment still in place, wards with beds lined up in neat rows, pharmacies with bottles still on shelves. He found the cash in the basement morgue, hidden in a refrigeration unit that no longer worked. More documents. These were communications memos, letters, transcripts, showing that officials had known about safety problems at the reactor for months before the disaster. That warnings had been ignored. That concerns had been suppressed. That the explosion wasn't just an accident, it was the result of criminal negligence at the highest levels. Dimitri's note. They knew. They always knew. And they did nothing. Names, dates, evidence. Use this to make them answer for what they did. By the time Marcus returned to the central square where Victor waited, it was past noon. His leg was on fire. His back ached. He was covered in dust and sweat and probably radioactive particles he didn't want to think about. But he'd visited 4 locations and understood the pattern now. Dimitri hadn't just hidden money. He'd hidden proof. Evidence of a massive cover-up, of corruption, of crimes that had gone unpunished for nearly 4 decades. And interspersed with that evidence was wealth, gold, art, cash enough to fund whatever came next. Enough to make sure the truth couldn't be silenced by lack of resources. It was brilliant. And terrifying. Victor looked up from his book as Marcus approached. "You find what you need? Some of it. I need to come back tomorrow. And the day after that." Victor studied him carefully. "Marcus, what exactly did your cousin hide in this city?" Marcus met his gaze. "The truth. And the means to tell it." That evening, back at the hotel, Marcus spread out everything he'd photographed on his phone. The paintings, the medical records, the communications. Each cache was a piece of a larger puzzle, and that puzzle was starting to form a picture that would shake governments. He thought about calling Sophie, hearing her voice, but it was the middle of the night in Portland. Instead, he pulled out the journal he'd found at the gymnasium he'd visited, 7 locations by the end of the second day, pushing himself past exhaustion, past pain, driven by something stronger than physical limitation. The journal was Dimitri's personal account, written over years, chronicling his transformation from engineer to guardian of secrets. Marcus opened it to the first page, dated May 1986, just days after the disaster. I returned to Pripyat today. Illegal, dangerous, but necessary. The city is dead, not destroyed, that would be easier to accept. Just empty, abandoned, like everyone vanished into air. I found our apartment, door open, cat still there, starving. I fed it, but it ran away. Everything else exactly as we left it. Coffee cups on table, newspaper dated April 25. Life stopped, but not erased. I took photographs. Someone must remember this. Someone must document what we lost. The entries continued, showing Dimitri's slow realization that the disaster wasn't just a tragedy, it was a crime scene. June 1986. Rumors everywhere. People getting sick, children especially. Government says it is stress, anxiety, unrelated to radiation. But I was at the plant. I know exposure levels. I know what we were told versus what was true. They are lying. Someone must keep record. Then, a year later, March 1987, I have discovered something. Officials are using the zone to hide things. I followed trucks today, trucks that had no reason to be here. Watched them unload crates into empty buildings. When they left, I investigated. Found gold bars. Not many, maybe 10. But why? Why hide gold in radioactive city? Unless you believe no one will ever look. The journal became a detective's log. Dimitri documented patterns, trucks arriving at night. Always the same buildings, always careful to avoid any areas with tourists or scientists. He started tracking the locations, following the pattern, discovering cache after cache of hidden wealth. They think radiation will protect their secrets better than any vault. They are wrong. I am collecting everything, not to keep, to use as evidence, to prove that while children died, powerful men profited. The entries became more focused as Dimitri aged. January 2000. I am getting older. Cancer, probably. The zone takes us all eventually. But I have purpose now. I have collected evidence of crimes, documented everything. But who can I trust? Government is compromised. Media is controlled. International community does not care about old Soviet disaster. I need someone outside system. Someone who will not be intimidated. Someone who understands suffering and injustice. Then, dated just 3 years ago, I have found him. Marcus Reed, son of my cousin Peter, who went to America in 1973. Marine Corps veteran, combat engineer, like me, wounded in Afghanistan, struggling with injury and poverty. Perfect. Not because he is desperate, though he is, but because he is broken enough to understand broken things, because suffering teaches empathy, because he has nothing to lose and everything to gain. I have researched his life. Divorced, 1 daughter, living in poverty. Despite his service, the Americans use their soldiers and discard them, just as Soviets used us. He will understand. When time comes, he will know what to do. Marcus set down the journal, his hands shaking. Dimitri had been watching him, researching him, choosing him, not randomly, but deliberately, because he saw in Marcus something Marcus hadn't seen in himself: potential, purpose, the capacity to finish what Dmitri had started. It should have felt creepy, invasive. Instead, it felt like being seen, really seen. For the first time in years, someone had looked at Marcus Reed and thought, "This man matters. This man can do something important." The weight of that trust was crushing and liberating at the same time. By the end of the 5th day, Marcus had visited 9 of the 12 locations. Each one revealed another piece of the conspiracy documents, showing embezzlement, evidence of smuggling operations, proof of cover-ups. And with each discovery, the financial value grew. 30 million here, 15 million there, gold and art and cash, hidden like seeds waiting to sprout into justice. But on the evening of the 5th day, something changed. Marcus returned to find Victor waiting in the central square, pacing, smoking nervously. The moment Victor saw him, he rushed over. "We have problem." Marcus's stomach tightened. "What kind of problem?" "Someone knows. About inheritance. About property. I received call this afternoon from government official, asking questions. Why are we spending so much time in zone? What are we looking for? Who authorized multiple visits? What did you tell them? That you are assessing property for legal transfer. Standard process. But Marcus, they are suspicious. And if they start investigating, if they start watching..." Marcus understood immediately. If the government discovered what Dmitri had hidden, everything would be confiscated. The evidence would disappear. The people responsible would bury it all again. Dmitri's decades of work would be for nothing. "How long do we have?" Victor shrugged helplessly. "Days? Maybe a week?" Officials move slowly, but once they start moving, they do not stop. If someone important becomes interested, we will lose everything. That night, Marcus barely slept again. But this time, it wasn't excitement or shock keeping him awake. It was calculation. He had 3 more locations to visit, 3 more caches to verify, and the clock was ticking. He thought about the journal, about Dmitri spending 37 years collecting evidence, waiting patiently for the right moment, the right person. And now Marcus had maybe a week before it all came crashing down. No pressure. The 6th day, Marcus pushed himself harder than he should have. He visited 2 locations before lunch, working through the pain in his leg that had graduated from screaming to howling. The 10th location was an old fire station. The 11th was the police headquarters. Each revealed more wealth, more evidence, more proof of crimes committed in the shadow of disaster. But it was the 12th location, the final one, marked with a star on Dmitri's map, that would change everything. The location was labeled simply Truth. It was in the basement of the Pripyat city administration building, the former seat of local government. The building was one of the more intact structures, possibly because it was more solidly built, or possibly because even looters respected the bones of bureaucracy. Marcus entered through a side door, his flashlight cutting through the gloom. The interior was a maze of offices and corridors, filing cabinets and desks still arranged in neat rows, as if the clerks might return from lunch any moment to continue processing permits and complaints and all the mundane machinery of local government. He found the stairs down to the basement. They were concrete, solid, descending into darkness that felt deeper than it should. At the bottom was a corridor, and at the end of that corridor was a steel door. Not just new like the others, this one was reinforced, heavy, with a sophisticated electronic lock that looked completely out of place in the abandoned building. Dmitri's final note was taped to the door. Marcus. Everything before this was preparation. Everything led here. What you find inside is the complete truth. All evidence, all documentation, all proof. And enough wealth to ensure truth cannot be silenced. This is the main vault. Use the override code. Your daughter's birthday. I know because a father's love is the strongest force in the universe. Make me proud, cousin. Marcus's throat tightened. His daughter's birthday. Sophie. October 15th, 2012. Dmitri had researched that deeply, had understood that Marcus's greatest motivation, his reason for still fighting, was the little girl waiting for him in Portland. He entered the code. 101512. The lock disengaged with a heavy mechanical sound. The door swung open on smooth hinges, and Marcus stepped into something that took his breath away. What happens next will turn this treasure hunt into a fight for survival, reveal truths, powerful people killed to keep hidden, and transform a broken veteran into something far more dangerous than anyone expected. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. The vault was enormous. Not a single room, but a series of connected chambers carved into the earth beneath Pripyat. The walls were lined with reinforced shelving holding hundreds of plastic bins, filing cabinets, and secured crates. But what dominated the space was the central chamber. Gold. Stacked gold bars gleaming under battery-powered lights that Dmitri must have installed and maintained over years. Not dozens of bars. Hundreds, maybe thousands, arranged in neat pyramids like offerings to some ancient god of commerce. Marcus walked forward slowly, his injured leg forgotten, his breath coming in short gasps. Each step echoed in the chamber. The gold seemed to glow in the artificial light, hypnotic and beautiful and terrifying. But it wasn't just gold. There were paintings, stacked carefully against the walls. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. There were sculptures wrapped in protective material. There were crates labeled Documents. Set 1 through Documents. Set 47. There were filing cabinets with drawers labeled in both Russian and English. Communications, financial records, medical reports, witness statements. This wasn't a cache. This was an archive, a museum, a prosecution's dream evidence locker. On a desk in the center of the room sat one final letter from Dmitri. Marcus opened it with shaking hands. Marcus, if you are reading this, you have found everything. The 12 locations were tests. This is the reality. Total value of gold and art, approximately $240 million. Value of documents as evidence, immeasurable. Value of what you can do with both, infinite. I spent 37 years building this collection. Started with curiosity, became obsession, ended as mission. I watched powerful men hide their crimes, watched children suffer while government lied, watched truth be buried beneath politics and fear. I cannot expose them. I am dying, unknown, old Soviet engineer nobody listens to. But you, Marcus Reed, American veteran with nothing to lose and everything to fight for, you can finish this. Take the wealth. Use it to establish foundation. Use it to fund lawyers, investigators, journalists. Use it to give voice to victims who have waited decades for justice. Use it to make sure Chernobyl truth is finally told. But be warned, once you start down this path, you cannot turn back. People who hid this wealth will want it back. People who committed these crimes will want evidence destroyed. You will be threatened. You will be offered bribes. You may be in danger. This is why I chose you. Not because you are rich or powerful or connected, but because you are stubborn. Because Marines do not leave mission unfinished. Because you understand that some things matter more than personal safety. I trust you, cousin. Not because I know you, but because I know your story. You have been broken. You have lost. You have suffered. And now you have chance to turn that suffering into purpose. Do not keep this wealth for yourself. Do not become what they are. Use it. Share it. Build something that honors the dead and helps the living. This is my last wish. This is my legacy. And now, it is yours, your cousin in blood and spirit. Dmitri. Read. Marcus sank into the chair at the desk, overwhelmed. Around him lay the evidence of crimes spanning decades, the wealth stolen from a nation, and the responsibility of deciding what came next. He thought about Sophie, about the $43 he'd had a week ago, about the man he'd been broken, defeated, barely surviving, and about the man Dmitri had believed he could become someone who could take this impossible situation and turn it into justice. His phone buzzed. "Victor! Marcus! Where are you? It is getting late. We must leave zone soon." Marcus looked around the vault one more time. At the gold that could solve every financial problem he'd ever had. At the documents that could change history. At the choice Dmitri had left him take the wealth and run. Or finish the mission and risk everything. He thought about Jackson and Martinez, his brothers who died in Afghanistan because a warning came too late. He thought about the children whose medical records he'd found, who'd suffered while their government lied. He thought about all the broken things in his life, all the failures, all the moments he'd felt worthless, and he made a decision. "Victor," he said into the phone, "I need you to come to the administration building. There's something you need to see, and then we need to talk about setting up a foundation." There was a long silence on the other end. Then Victor's voice, careful and measured. "Marcus, what exactly have you found?" Marcus looked at the mountains of gold, at the walls of evidence, at Dmitri's letter, clutched in his hand. "Everything," he said. "I've found everything. And now we're going to make sure the whole world knows." Outside, the sun was setting over Pripyat. The Ferris wheel cast a long shadow across the empty square. The ghost city held its breath, waiting to see if its secrets would finally be told. And in the vault beneath the abandoned administration building, Marcus Reed, broken veteran, failed mechanic, desperate father, became something new. Not a treasure hunter, not a lucky heir, but a guardian of truth, armed with the evidence to bring down the powerful and the resources to make sure they couldn't silence him. The hunt was over. The real work was about to begin, and whether it saved him or destroyed him, Marcus knew one thing for certain. He wasn't running anymore. He was standing his ground, and this time, he wasn't going to fail. Victor descended the stairs into the vault slowly, one hand gripping the railing, the other holding his flashlight. Marcus waited at the bottom, watching the lawyer's face as the beam of light swept across the mountains of gold, the walls of documents, the carefully organized evidence of decades of corruption. Victor stopped on the last step. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. No words came out. 240 million in gold and art, Marcus said quietly. Another 50 million in documents and evidence. Dmitri spent 37 years collecting it all, and now it's mine. Legally, mine. Victor finally found his voice. Mother of God. He walked forward like a man in a dream, touching a gold bar as if to confirm it was real. "Marcus, do you understand what this means? Do you understand what you have found?" "I'm beginning to." Victor turned to face him, and his expression had changed from shock to fear. "This is not treasure, my friend. This is bomb. This is evidence that will implicate government officials, oligarchs, maybe even Russian politicians. People have died for far less than this. People will kill for this." "I know. Then you know we must be very, very careful how we proceed." Victor pulled out his phone, started taking photographs of the evidence labels, the document categories. "We need lawyers. International lawyers. We need security. We need to move this somewhere safe before anyone discovers what is here." Marcus had been thinking about this all afternoon. How long would it take to catalog everything, to document what we have? Victor looked around the vault, calculating. Properly? With legal documentation? Photographs? Provenance research? Months. Maybe a year. We don't have a year. You said officials are already asking questions. Yes. But. So we have days. Maybe a week before someone important gets curious enough to come looking. Which means we need to move fast and move smart. Marcus pulled out the map Dmitri had left. There are backup locations. Places outside the zone where Dmitri stored copies of the most important documents. He knew this might happen. He prepared for it. Victor studied the map, then looked at Marcus with something like respect. "Your cousin was very intelligent man. And paranoid. Good combination for this kind of work." He paused. "Marcus, I must ask, what do you intend to do with this? You could take the gold, sell it quietly, live rest of your life in comfort. No one would know. Your daughter would never worry about money again." It was the question Marcus had been wrestling with since he'd found Dimitri's final letter. The temptation was real. God, it was real. He thought about Sophie, about the birthday parties and school trips and college tuition he couldn't afford. Thought about Jennifer's disappointed voice every time he failed to send money. Thought about his empty apartment, his empty bank account, his empty life. $240 million would solve every problem he had. Every single one. He could set up Sophie for life, could afford the best doctors for his leg, could buy a house, a new truck, could stop being the failure everyone saw when they looked at him. But then he thought about the medical records he'd found. The children who'd suffered while their government lied. He thought about Dmitri spending decades documenting crimes, waiting for someone who would care enough to see it through. He thought about Jackson and Martinez, his brothers, who died because someone hadn't acted fast enough. "I'm going to finish what Dmitri started," Marcus said. "I'm going to expose the truth, all of it, and I'm going to use the money to make sure the victims finally get justice." Victor smiled, but it was a sad smile. "I was hoping you would say that, but I was also hoping you would not, because now your life becomes very dangerous." Over the next 48 hours, Marcus barely slept. With Victor's help, they photographed every piece of evidence in the vault. They catalogued the gold bars, 2,347 of them, each weighing 1 kilogram, each worth approximately $60,000 on the current market. They documented the artwork, 163 pieces, ranging from minor works to paintings by masters that had been reported stolen decades ago. But more importantly, they copied the documents. Every memo, every letter, every medical record, every financial transaction. Victor had connections with a small team of trusted assistants, people he'd worked with for years, people he swore could be trusted. They worked in shifts, scanning documents, encrypting files, uploading everything to secure servers in 3 different countries. Redundancy, Victor explained. If they come for the physical evidence, we still have digital copies. If they take digital copies, we have physical backups hidden in other locations. Dmitri taught me this. Never keep all your eggs in one basket, especially when the eggs are explosive. On the second day, the first threat arrived. Marcus was at the hotel when his phone rang. Unknown number, Ukrainian country code, he answered cautiously. Mr. Reed. The voice was male, middle-aged, speaking English, with a refined Ukrainian accent. My name is not important. What is important is that we know what you have found in Pripyat, and we know what you are planning. We know. Planning. Marcus's blood went cold. Who is this? As I said, not important, but I represent certain interests who are very concerned about the materials you have discovered. Materials that legally should be returned to the Ukrainian government for proper processing. The materials are legally mine. Inherited property. A soft laugh. Mr. Reed, you are American. You do not understand how things work here. What Dmitri Reed collected over the years, he collected illegally. It belongs to the state, and the state would like it back. Then the state can make an official legal claim through proper channels. Or, the voice continued, ignoring him, we could offer you alternative arrangement. We understand you are man of limited means, that you have family obligations, that you traveled here hoping to solve financial problems. We can help with that. $5 million, American currency, wired to any account you specify. Tax-free, no questions asked. In exchange, you turn over all materials to us and return to America. Everyone wins. Morning next 10. Morning next 10 next 10. $5 million. Just 2 days ago, that would have been more money than Marcus could have imagined. Now, knowing what Dmitri had actually hidden, it was an insult. But more than that, it was confirmation that someone powerful was watching. Someone who wanted the evidence buried. No, Marcus said. Silence on the other end. Then the voice, colder now. Mr. Reed, I would reconsider. The offer is generous, and the alternative is not pleasant. Ukraine can be a dangerous place for foreigners who make wrong enemies. Accidents happen. People disappear. We would hate for something unfortunate to occur. Is that a threat? It is friendly advice. You have 48 hours to accept our offer. After that, we cannot guarantee your safety. The line went dead. Marcus sat on the hotel bed, his hands shaking. Not from fear, though. There was fear, but from rage. These were the same people Dmitri had been documenting for decades. The same corruption. The same intimidation. Just a new generation of it. He called Victor immediately. They know. Someone called, offered me $5 million to hand everything over. When I refused, they threatened me. Victor was quiet for a long moment. Then, we move faster. I have contacted lawyer in Kiev, woman named Oksana Kovalenko. She has spent 20 years representing Chernobyl victims. She cannot be bought, cannot be scared. If anyone can help us navigate this, it is her. They met Oksana the next morning at a cafe in Kiev's old town, far from government buildings and curious ears. She was in her late 40s, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, and eyes that had seen too much suffering to be impressed by anything short of genuine courage. Victor made the introductions. Marcus laid out everything: Dimitri's letter, the vault, the evidence, the threats. He showed her photographs of the documents on his encrypted tablet. Oksana studied them in silence, her expression unreadable. When she finally looked up, her eyes were wet with tears she refused to let fall. "I knew," she said, her English precise and formal. "For 20 years, I have represented families. Children with cancer, adults with radiation sickness, families who lost everything. And always, government says we have no proof. Says radiation levels were acceptable. Says illnesses are coincidence. Says evacuation was handled properly." She touched the tablet screen gently, as if the documents might break. "And all that time, the proof existed, hidden, waiting. Can you help us?" Marcus asked. "Help you?" She looked at him like he'd asked if the sun would rise. "Mr. Reed, I have waited my entire career for evidence like this. Of course I will help you. But you must understand what you are asking. To expose this, to make this public, you will make enemies of very powerful people. In Ukraine, in Russia, perhaps even in Western governments who prefer not to revisit Cold War disasters. I understand. Do you?" She leaned forward. "They have already threatened you. Next, they will try to discredit you. They will say you are fraud, treasure hunter, crazy American veteran suffering from PTSD who invented elaborate fantasy. When that fails, they will try to have you arrested. When that fails—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Marcus met her gaze. "My cousin spent 37 years collecting this evidence because he believed truth mattered more than safety. I've spent 3 years feeling worthless, like my life didn't matter, like I was just taking up space. This is the first time since Afghanistan that I've felt like what I do actually means something. So, yes, I understand the risks, and I'm doing it anyway." Oksana smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. "Then we begin. But we must move carefully and quickly. First, we secure evidence in multiple locations. Second, we establish legal foundation to protect you and the materials. Third, we start contacting victims' families, building coalition of people who have standing to demand justice. And fourth, we go public before they can stop us." Over the next week, Marcus's life became a blur of legal documents, encrypted communications, and midnight meetings in parking garages that felt like scenes from a spy movie. Oksana moved with the efficiency of someone who'd been preparing for this moment her entire career. She had networks, lawyers, activists, journalists, even a few sympathetic government officials who'd been waiting for evidence solid enough to act on. The gold and artwork were moved in stages to secure locations, some in Ukraine, some smuggled across borders to countries with stronger rule of law. The documents were copied and recopied, distributed to trusted parties around the world. As Oksana explained, they cannot silence what is everywhere. But securing evidence was only half the battle. The other half was building the case for what they would do with it. Marcus spent hours reading through Dimitri's journals, not just the factual documentation, but the personal reflections. The entries painted a picture of a man slowly consumed by his mission, who'd sacrificed normal life for this higher purpose. August 1992. My wife left me today. She says I am obsessed, that I care more about dead city than about living family. Maybe she is right, but how can I stop when children are still suffering? When families still have no answers? When criminals still walk free? Someone must remember. Someone must care. Another entry, Years later, December 2005. Diagnosis confirmed. Thyroid cancer. Ironic, I suppose. I survived initial disaster, only to be killed slowly by same radiation I have been documenting. But I have made preparations, have secured evidence, have found air. Work will continue after I am gone. And then the final entries, written in the last months of Dimitri's life. Marcus Reed served in Afghanistan as combat engineer. Same job I had, building things, solving problems, trying to make order from chaos. He was injured, received medical discharge, struggles with PTSD and chronic pain, divorced. One daughter he cannot support. On paper, he is perfect example of broken man. But I do not see broken man. I see man who served his country and was discarded. I see man who still fights every day despite pain. I see man who has not given up even when he has every reason to. I see man who will understand that suffering must mean something. That if we survive, we have obligation to make survival matter. He is right person. I am certain. When he finds what I have hidden, he will have choice, keep wealth for himself or use it for others. And I believe, I must believe, that he will choose correctly. Because if men like Marcus Reed cannot be trusted to do right thing, then perhaps we deserve the corruption we get. I leave him my life's work. I leave him my mission. I leave him choice that will define who he becomes. And I pray that I have chosen well. Reading those words, sitting in a Kiev apartment, safe house at 2 a.m, Marcus felt the full weight of Dimitri's trust crash down on him. This wasn't just about money or evidence. It was about whether decent people still existed. Whether someone who'd been beaten down by life could still choose to stand up. Whether the broken could still be trusted with something precious. Marcus thought about the Marine he'd been, young, idealistic, believing he was fighting for something that mattered. He thought about the veteran he'd become, bitter, isolated, feeling like his service had been wasted. And he thought about the man he was becoming now, someone who could transform suffering into purpose, who could turn a ghost city's secrets into a force for justice. He called Sophie. It was evening in Portland. She answered on the second ring. "Daddy, when are you coming home?" God. He missed her. Missed her voice, her smile, her uncomplicated faith that her father was someone worth loving. "Soon, baby. I'm finishing up the work here. Mom says you're doing something important. Something that might be on the news." Marcus smiled despite his exhaustion. "Maybe. Would that be okay with you? Are you helping people like you used to when you were a Marine?" The question hit him harder than it should have. Because yes, that's exactly what he was doing. Helping people. Just like he'd tried to do before the IED. Before everything fell apart. Before he became a ghost of his former self. "Yeah, sweetheart. I'm helping people. Then I'm proud of you, Daddy. Even if it takes longer. Even if it's hard. I'm proud of you." After they hung up, Marcus sat in the dark apartment and cried. Not from sadness, but from something else. Relief, maybe. Or validation. Or just the release of finally feeling like he was doing something that mattered. The threats escalated. His hotel room was ransacked. While he was out, nothing taken. Just tossed. A message. His truck back in Portland was vandalized, windows smashed. Though he wasn't there to see it. Jennifer called, furious and scared, saying men had come to her house asking questions about him, about where he was, about what he was doing in Ukraine. Oksana arranged for security. 2 former Ukrainian Special Forces soldiers who worked private protection. They stayed close but not obvious. Shadows that made Marcus feel both safer and more paranoid. And then the victims started coming forward. Oksana had been quietly reaching out to families she'd represented over the years, telling them that evidence had been found. Real evidence. Proof that their suffering hadn't been random, that the disaster could have been prevented, that officials had lied and covered up the truth. The first to arrive at Oksana's office was an elderly woman named Irina. She'd been evacuated from Pripyat at age 35, pregnant with her second child. Both her children had died of cancer before their 20th birthdays. She'd spent 3 decades fighting for recognition, for compensation, for someone to admit that the government had failed her family. She sat across from Marcus in Oksana's conference room, her hands trembling as she looked at the documents he'd found. Medical records showing her children's radiation exposure levels, memos discussing how to minimize official statistics, communications about hiding the true scope of the disaster. "My son, Alexei," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He was 7 when we evacuated. By age 15, he had thyroid cancer. By 17, it spread to his lungs. He died 2 months before his 19th birthday. And the whole time, doctors said it was genetic. Bad luck. Nothing to do with Chernobyl." She looked up at Marcus, tears streaming down her weathered face. "But it was Chernobyl. These papers prove it. They knew. They knew what radiation we were exposed to. They knew children would get sick. And they hid it." Marcus felt his own throat tighten. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what happened to your family. Do not apologize. You did not cause this. But you can help fix it. You can give my son's death meaning. You can prove that he died not from bad luck, but from criminal negligence. That is worth more than any compensation. That is justice." More families came. Parents who'd lost children. Adults who'd been children during the evacuation and now suffered chronic illnesses. Workers who'd been sent into radiation zones without proper protection and now dealt with cancers, immune disorders, early deaths. Each one had a story. Each one had been told their suffering was coincidence, unrelated, impossible to prove. And each one looked at the documents Marcus had found like they were proof that their pain had been real, that they hadn't been crazy, that someone finally believed them. A man named Petro, now in his 50s, had been a firefighter called to the reactor the night it exploded. He'd survived the initial radiation exposure but had suffered ever since, cancer after cancer, surgery after surgery, his body slowly being destroyed by what he'd been exposed to that night. "They told us it was safe," he said, his voice raw. "Told us to go in without proper equipment because there was no time. Told us we were heroes, and we believed them. I lost 17 friends from my fire brigade, all dead within 5 years. And government said it was stress, said we had pre-existing conditions, said anything except truth." He looked at the documents Marcus showed him, orders from officials who knew the radiation levels but sent responders anyway. "This proves they murdered us. Sent us to die knowing we would die. That is not accident. That is crime." Listening to these stories, seeing the pain these families carried, Marcus understood completely why Dmitri had devoted his life to collecting evidence. This wasn't abstract. This wasn't just corruption statistics and government memos. This was real people whose lives had been destroyed while powerful men lied to save their careers. But understanding came with responsibility, and responsibility came with a target on his back. The second major threat came 2 weeks after the first. Marcus was walking back to the safe house, after meeting with another victim's family, when a black Mercedes pulled alongside him. The window rolled down. A man in an expensive suit, maybe 60 years old, with cold eyes and a politician's smile. "Mr. Reed, a moment of your time." Marcus kept walking. The car kept pace. "I represent parties who are very interested in the materials you have acquired. We are prepared to make much more generous offer than you have previously received. $20 million, plus guaranteed safe passage back to America, plus guarantee that no one will bother you or your family ever again." Marcus stopped, looked at the man, "And in exchange, you turn over all physical and digital evidence. You sign documents saying materials were fabricated. You disappear back to your country and never speak of this again. And if I refuse?" The man's smile didn't change, but his eyes grew colder. "Then I cannot be responsible for what happens. You have daughter in America, yes, Sophie? 11 years old? Pretty girl. Would be tragedy if something happened to her because her father made poor choices." Marcus felt rage explode in his chest. Before he could think, he'd crossed to the car, reached through the window, grabbed the man by his expensive tie, and yanked him half out of the window. "You threaten my daughter," Marcus said, his voice low and deadly. "And I promise you, I don't care how much money you have, how much power, how many people you know. I will make sure every piece of evidence I found gets published everywhere. Every news outlet, every government agency, every website. I will burn your entire world down. Do you understand me?" The man's face had gone pale. He nodded slightly. Marcus released him, stepped back. His security detail had appeared from nowhere, hands inside jackets where weapons waited. The Mercedes sped away. Victor, who'd witnessed everything, put a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "That was either very brave or very stupid. Probably both." "Yes, probably both," Victor smiled grimly. "But now they know you cannot be scared. That is good. Fear invites more pressure. Strength sometimes creates respect. Or, at least, caution." That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He sat in the safe house apartment, his leg aching, his hands still shaking from the adrenaline crash, and thought about what he'd become. The broken veteran who'd arrived in Ukraine 3 weeks ago would never have grabbed a man through a car window, would never have made threats, would never have had the strength to stand up to power. But something had changed. Dmitri's mission had given him purpose. The victims' stories had given him conviction. And the threats against his daughter had ignited something he'd thought was dead. The protective fury of a father, the warrior instinct of a Marine, the stubborn refusal to back down that had kept him alive in Afghanistan. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through photos of Sophie. Her smile, her messy hair, her eyes that looked at him like he was still a hero, despite all evidence to the contrary. He'd been fighting for her all along, for her future, for her security, for her to not grow up with a father who'd given up. But now he was fighting for something bigger. For Irina and her dead children, for Petro and his dying friends, for all the families who'd been lied to for decades, for the truth that Dmitri had spent his life protecting. Marcus Reed, the man who'd felt worthless, who'd sold everything he owned just to afford a plane ticket, who'd thought his best days were behind him, had become the guardian of the most important evidence to emerge from Chernobyl in decades. And he wasn't backing down. Not for money, not for threats, not for anything. Because some things matter more than safety. Some truths are worth fighting for. And sometimes the most unlikely people, the broken ones, the discarded ones, The ones everyone underestimated turn out to be exactly who the world needs. Dmitri had been right to choose him. And Marcus was going to make damn sure he finished what his cousin had started. The decision came on a grey morning in Kiev, 3 weeks after Marcus had found the main vault. He sat in Oksana's office, surrounded by lawyers, accountants, and victim advocates, all of them waiting for him to sign the papers that would determine what happened next. On the table in front of him were 2 sets of documents. The first would establish the Dmitri Reed Memorial Foundation for Chernobyl Justice and Relief, transferring ownership of the vast majority of the assets, gold, artwork, cash, into a trust managed by an international board. The victims' families would finally have resources for medical care, legal representation, and compensation. The documents would be published, the truth would be told, and justice would finally have a chance. The second set of documents would allow Marcus to claim the full inheritance personally. Legal. Defensible. In court. Live. He could take the $290 million, pay whatever taxes were required, and walk away a wealthy man. Sophie would never want for anything. He could afford the best doctors for his leg, the best therapists for his PTSD. He could buy a house, start a business, live comfortably for the rest of his life. No one would blame him. He'd earned it, found it. Victor sat across from him, silent. Oksana stood by the window, her back to the room, also silent. They'd both made their arguments over the past days. Now it was just Marcus, and the choice that would define who he was. He thought about the man he'd been 4 weeks ago. Broken, desperate, selling his grandfather's tools to afford a plane ticket on a gamble that seemed insane. That man would have signed the second set of documents without hesitation, would have taken the money and run, and never looked back. But that man didn't exist anymore. Marcus picked up the pen and signed the first set of documents. All of them, page after page, transferring assets to the foundation, establishing the trust, agreeing to oversight and accountability, giving away a fortune. When he finished, he set down the pen and looked up. Oksana had turned from the window, tears streaming down her face. Victor was smiling, not his nervous lawyer smile, but something genuine and warm. "You are either bravest man I have ever met," Victor said, "or most foolish." "Probably both," Marcus replied, echoing what Victor had said before. "No." Oksana crossed to him and took his hands in hers. "Just brave. Dmitri chose well. He chose very well." The Dmitri Reed Memorial Foundation became official on a Wednesday in October. The press conference was held in Kiev's International Press Center, a modern building of glass and steel that felt worlds away from Pripyat's decaying concrete. Media from 20 countries attended, journalists who'd been covering Chernobyl for decades, alongside young reporters who'd never heard of Pripyat until Marcus's story broke. Marcus sat at a long table with Oksana, Victor, and 3 representatives from victims' families, Irina, Petro, and a younger woman named Svetlana, who'd been born 2 months after the disaster and had lived with severe health problems her entire life. The room was packed. Cameras lined the back wall. Reporters filled every seat. And for the first time in his life, Marcus was the center of attention for something other than failure. Oksana spoke first, her English crisp and clear. For 37 years, the world thought it knew the truth about Chernobyl. Today, we reveal that the truth was buried, hidden by those who valued political convenience over human life. Thanks to one man's decades-long mission to document corruption, and another man's courage to bring that documentation to light. We can finally prove what victims have known all along, that their suffering was preventable, that officials lied, that justice has been denied for too long. She introduced Marcus, explaining who he was, how he'd inherited the evidence, what he'd found. Then it was his turn to speak. Marcus approached the podium, his leg aching from standing too long, his hands trembling slightly. He'd never been comfortable with public speaking. In the Marines, he'd been the guy who fixed things, not the guy who gave speeches. But this wasn't about comfort. This was about finishing Dimitri's mission. "My name is Marcus Reed," he began, his voice steady despite his nerves. 4 weeks ago, I was a broke veteran living in a studio apartment in Portland, Oregon. I couldn't afford my daughter's school supplies. I'd sold everything I owned just to pay rent. I felt worthless, like my life didn't matter, like I was just taking up space. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Then I received a letter from a lawyer in Ukraine telling me I'd inherited property in Pripyat from a cousin I'd never met. I thought it was a scam. But I was desperate enough to take the chance. I scraped together enough money to fly here, expecting to find nothing but abandoned buildings in a ghost city. The room was silent, everyone listening. What I found instead was a vault containing $290 million in hidden assets and 37 years of documentation, proving that Chernobyl's aftermath was far worse than the world was told. My cousin, Dimitri Reed, spent his entire adult life collecting evidence that powerful people wanted buried. He documented crimes, he saved proof, and he did it knowing he'd probably never see justice in his lifetime. Marcus looked directly at the cameras. Dimitri left me a choice. I could keep the fortune for myself, solve all my financial problems, and walk away. Or I could do what he asked, use the resources to establish a foundation that would finally give victims the support they deserve, and expose the truth that's been hidden for decades. He pulled out Dimitri's letter and read from it. "Do not keep this wealth for yourself. Do not become what they are. Use it. Share it. Build something that honors the dead and helps the living." Those were my cousin's last words to me, and I'm going to honor them. The questions came rapid fire. How much evidence was there? Who was implicated? What legal actions were planned? How much money would go to victims? Marcus answered what he could, deferred to Oksana for the legal specifics. But one question hit harder than the others. A young reporter from the BBC asked, "Mr. Reed, you gave up nearly $300 million to help people you'd never met. Why?" Marcus thought about all the easy answers: duty, honor, doing what's right. But he gave the real answer. "Because I know what it's like to suffer, while everyone tells you it's your own fault. I know what it's like to need help and have nowhere to turn. I know what it's like to feel invisible, while the world moves on without you." His voice cracked slightly. "These families have been invisible for 37 years. Someone finally saw them. And I'll be damned if I let them disappear again." The press conference made international news. American veteran exposes Chernobyl cover-up, ran in major newspapers across 3 continents. $300 million inheritance donated to radiation victims trended on social media. Documentary crews reached out. Book publishers called. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know Marcus's story. But the media attention, the headlines, the praise, none of it mattered as much as what happened 3 days after the press conference. Marcus was at the Foundation's temporary office, a converted warehouse space on the outskirts of Kyiv, when a bus pulled up outside. Oksana had organized a meeting with victims' families to explain how the Foundation would work. What kind of support would be available? How to apply for assistance? Marcus had expected maybe 20 people, 50 at most. 137 people got off that bus. And more kept arriving in cars, on motorcycles, on foot. By noon, over 300 people crowded into the warehouse. Survivors, children of survivors, grandchildren of people who'd been evacuated from Pripyat. They all wanted to meet the American who'd given up a fortune for them. An elderly man approached Marcus, walking with a cane, his hands shaking with either age or emotion or both. He spoke in broken English. "My name is Boris. I worked at reactor. Was there night of explosion. Lost many friends. Suffered many years. Government says, we are not heroes, just workers who got sick. But you prove we were right. You prove they lied. Thank you. Thank you." The man hugged Marcus. And Marcus found himself hugging back this stranger who'd been through hell while officials denied his pain. A middle-aged woman came next. "I am Natalia. My mother died of thyroid cancer when I was teenager. Doctors said not related to Chernobyl. But I found her name in your documents. Her radiation exposure recorded, hidden, denied. Now I have proof. Now I can stop wondering if I imagined her suffering." One after another, they came, sharing stories, showing photographs of lost loved ones, weeping as they explained what it meant to finally have someone believe them, to finally have evidence that their pain was real, that they weren't crazy, that the system had failed them, and someone was finally admitting it. Marcus stood there for hours, his legs screaming in protest, his back aching. But he couldn't leave. These people needed to be heard, needed to know someone was listening. And if that someone had to be him, then he'd stand there all day if necessary. Toward the end, a young woman approached holding the hand of a small boy, maybe 5 years old. The woman couldn't have been more than 25. But she looked exhausted, worn down by more than lack of sleep. "This is my son, Mikhail," she said in careful English. "He has leukemia. The doctors say it is genetic, random, nothing to do with his grandfather, who was first responder at Chernobyl. But I know truth. I know radiation effects can pass through generations. Your foundation, it will help people like Mikhail, children who still suffer from disaster that happened before their parents were born." Marcus knelt down despite the pain in his leg, bringing himself to eye level with the little boy. The kid looked at him with big dark eyes, tired eyes, eyes that had already seen too many hospital rooms. "Yeah," Marcus said, his voice thick. "We're going to help people like Mikhail. That's exactly what we're going to do." The woman started crying. Mikhail hugged his mother's leg, confused by adult emotions he couldn't understand. And Marcus stood there in that converted warehouse, surrounded by 300 people whose lives had been destroyed by a disaster decades ago. And he finally understood completely why Dmitri had devoted his life to this mission. Because these people mattered. Their stories mattered. Their pain was real, and it deserved to be acknowledged, and they deserved justice, even if it came 3 decades too late. By November, the foundation was fully operational. The board had been established, international experts in radiation health, legal advocates, financial administrators, and 3 representatives from victims' families who ensured the voices of survivors remained central to every decision. The first grants went to medical care. Clinics in Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia that specialized in treating radiation-related illnesses received funding for equipment, staff, and patient support. Within the first month, over 500 families received assistance with medical bills they'd been struggling to pay for years. The second wave of funding went to legal representation. Oksana assembled a team of lawyers to pursue compensation claims against government entities and individuals who'd been proven complicit in the cover-up. The cases would take years, but for the first time, victims had the resources to actually fight in court. The third initiative was education. The foundation funded a research institute to study the long-term effects of radiation exposure, not just physical but psychological, economic, social. The goal was to create a comprehensive understanding of what the disaster had really cost, not in abstract terms, but in human lives and human suffering. And through it all, Marcus worked. Not from an office in Kiev, but traveling between Ukraine and America, coordinating with the board, meeting with families, telling Dmitry's story to anyone who would listen. The foundation paid him a salary of $75,000 a year. Modest, compared to the fortune he'd given up, but more than he'd made in the past 3 years, combined. More importantly, it was enough. Enough to rent a real apartment in Portland. Enough to send Sophie what she needed for school. Enough to afford proper medical care for his leg and therapy for his PTSD. Enough to rebuild a life that felt worth living. In December, Marcus returned to Portland for the first time since leaving in September. Sophie ran to him at the airport, and he caught her in a hug that lifted her off the ground despite his bad leg protesting. "Daddy, I saw you on TV. You were at the United Nations." He had been at the UN the week before, testifying about Chernobyl accountability. The experience had been surreal, a broke veteran who'd sold his wedding ring for plane ticket money now addressing international diplomats about justice and corruption. "Did I look okay on TV? You looked like a hero." That night, over dinner at Jennifer's house, she'd insisted he come. Their relationship transformed by his transformation. Sophie pulled out a school project. She'd done a report on Chernobyl for her social studies class, using Marcus's story as the centerpiece. "I told everyone my dad found secret documents that proved the government lied," she said proudly, "and that he gave away $300 million to help people. My teacher said it was the best report she'd ever seen. I got an A+. Jennifer looked at him across the table. Her expression complicated pride mixed with residual anger, mixed with something that might have been respect. "She tells everyone about you now. About what you're doing. She's proud of you, Marcus. We both are." Later, after Sophie had gone to bed, Jennifer walked Marcus to his car. They stood in the driveway of the house they'd once shared. Back when he'd been a different person. Back when everything had seemed possible before the war broke him. "I was wrong about you," Jennifer said quietly. "When you told me about the inheritance, about going to Ukraine, I thought you were chasing a fantasy. I thought you were running away from responsibility. But you weren't running away. You were running toward something. Toward purpose. I didn't know that when I left. I just knew I couldn't keep living the way I was living. And now," Marcus looked up at the stars, thinking about Dmitry's vault, about Irina's tears, about the little boy with leukemia, about all the lives that had been changed by one stubborn engineer who'd refused to let truth stay buried. "Now I know why I survived Afghanistan. Why I lived when Jackson and Martinez didn't. It wasn't random. It wasn't luck. It was so I could be here, now, finishing what Dmitry started, making their sacrifices mean something." Jennifer hugged him, not the romantic embrace of their past, but the supportive hug of someone who'd watched another person transform from broken to whole. "You're a good man, Marcus Reed. I'm sorry it took me so long to remember that." By spring, the foundation's impact was undeniable. Over 2,000 families had received assistance. Legal cases were moving forward. The research institute had published preliminary findings that were reshaping understanding of long-term radiation effects. And most importantly, the world was finally paying attention. Criminal investigations had been opened in Ukraine and Russia based on the evidence Marcus had provided. Several former officials were facing charges. The International Atomic Energy Agency had launched a comprehensive review of Chernobyl handling. The UN General Assembly had passed a resolution recognizing the need for transparency in nuclear disasters. None of it brought back the dead. None of it erased 37 years of suffering, but it was justice, imperfect, incomplete, but real. And through it all, Marcus Reed became the face of that justice. Not because he sought the spotlight, he still hated giving speeches, still felt awkward in front of cameras, but because his story embodied what the Foundation represented. The idea that broken people can heal, that unlikely heroes can emerge from the most desperate circumstances, that truth can triumph, even when powerful people try to bury it. The recognition came in waves. The Ukrainian government awarded him the Order of Merit. The American government invited him to speak at a congressional hearing about veteran support. Time magazine named him one of the year's most influential people. But the recognition that mattered most came from the people he'd helped. A letter from Irina, written in careful English with Victor's help. Dear Marcus, my son Alexei died 23 years ago. For 23 years, I wondered if his death was my fault somehow, if I had failed to protect him. Your evidence proved that it was not my failure, but government's failure. This does not bring him back, but it gives his death meaning. It proves he was victim of crime, not random illness. Thank you for this gift. It is more valuable than all the money in the world. A photograph from Petro, taken at a memorial service for his firefighter brigade. 17 names on a monument that now included the official acknowledgement. Died as result of criminal negligence during Chernobyl disaster response. Petro had written on the back, "My brothers are finally honored as heroes, not statistics, because of you." And a crayon drawing from little Mikhail, the boy with leukemia. Simple stick figures, a tall man and a small boy holding hands. The tall man had a cape. Above the drawing, in child's handwriting, "Thank you for being hero." Marcus kept all these letters and drawings in a folder in his office at the Foundation's permanent headquarters in Kiev. On days when the work felt overwhelming, when the legal battles dragged on, when critics accused him of being attention-seeking or questioned his motives, he'd pull out that folder and remember why this mattered. In June, 1 year after Marcus had first arrived in Ukraine, the Foundation organized a memorial ceremony at Pripyat. It took months of negotiations with Ukrainian authorities, special permits, radiation, safety protocols. But Oksana insisted it was necessary. The survivors needed to return, needed to say goodbye properly, needed to reclaim their city, even if just for one day. Over 500 people made the journey. Former residents of Pripyat, now elderly, many of them seeing their homes for the first time since April 1986. Children and grandchildren of evacuees who'd grown up hearing stories about the city they'd never seen. And Marcus, standing in the central square where he'd first realized the inheritance was real, where his life had changed forever. Victor stood beside him as survivors walked through empty streets, pointing out buildings where they'd lived, schools where they'd studied, parks where they'd played. Some cried, some laughed, remembering better times. Some just stood in silence, absorbing the weight of what had been lost. "You have done remarkable thing," Victor said. Not just with money, not just with foundation. You have given these people voice again. You have made sure they are not forgotten. Marcus watched an elderly woman place flowers on the steps of an apartment building, then sit down and cry. Two younger women, her daughters, probably sat beside her, holding her hands. 3 generations, connected by loss, but finally able to grieve properly. Dmitri did this, Marcus said. I just finished what he started. No. Victor shook his head. Dmitri collected evidence. You turned evidence into action. You made his mission matter. That was your choice, your courage. Do not diminish that. The ceremony included speeches from survivors, a moment of silence for those who died, and the unveiling of a memorial plaque at the community center where Marcus had found the first vault. The plaque bore both Dmitri's name and Marcus's, though Marcus had argued against including his name. Oksana had overruled him. You are part of this story now. Accept that. At the end of the ceremony, as the sun set over Pripyat's ruins, turning the concrete buildings golden, Marcus stood alone by the Ferris wheel, the rust-red monument that had become the symbol of interrupted futures, of a city frozen in time, of dreams that would never be fulfilled. His phone buzzed. Sophie, texting from Portland. Mom showed me pictures of the ceremony. Are you okay, Daddy? It looks sad there. He typed back, It is sad, but it's also beautiful. These people finally have a place to grieve. That matters. Her response came immediately. I'm proud of you. When I grow up, I want to help people like you do. Marcus stared at that message for a long time, feeling something shift in his chest. Sophie was proud of him, not despite his struggles, not despite his failures, but because he'd turned those struggles into purpose. Because he'd shown her that broken people can heal, that setbacks don't define you, that it's never too late to become someone worth admiring. He typed back, You already help people, sweetheart. Every day, just by being you. The year that followed was the most challenging and rewarding of Marcus's life. The foundation expanded its operations to include programs in Belarus and Russia. The legal cases progressed, with several former officials convicted of negligence and corruption. The Research Institute published groundbreaking studies that changed international protocols for nuclear disaster response. And Marcus Reed, the broken veteran who'd sold his grandfather's tools to afford a desperate gamble, became something he'd never imagined. An advocate, a public figure, a symbol of unlikely redemption. But he never forgot where he came from. He still lived modestly, spending most of his time traveling between Ukraine and America, meeting with families, coordinating foundation programs, telling Dmitri's story. He still dealt with PTSD, still had nightmares about Afghanistan, still walked with a limp that would never fully heal. The difference was that now, when he looked in the mirror, he didn't see a failure. He saw someone who'd been broken and had chosen to heal by helping others heal. He saw someone who'd been given an impossible choice and had made the right decision. He saw someone who mattered. In the fall, on the anniversary of Dmitri's death, Marcus returned to Pripyat one more time. This time, he brought Sophie. Jennifer had been hesitant, radiation concerns, safety issues, but Sophie had insisted, I want to see where Daddy's story happened. I want to understand. They walked through the ghost city together, father and daughter, Marcus explaining what had happened, what he'd found, why it mattered. Sophie listened with the serious concentration of someone who understood she was witnessing something important. They stood in front of the community center where it had all begun. The memorial plaque gleamed in the autumn sun. "This is where you found Grandpa Dimitri's letter?" Sophie asked. "Yeah. Right down those stairs, in a room that shouldn't have been there, I found a letter addressed to me from a cousin I'd never met, and my whole life changed. Were you scared?" Marcus thought about that morning, the fear, the disbelief, the overwhelming sense that something massive and incomprehensible was happening. Terrified, but sometimes the best things happen when we're terrified. Sophie took his hand. "I'm glad you were brave enough to be scared." That simple sentence, delivered with the wisdom only children possess, nearly broke him. Because that's exactly what courage was: not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite fear. And Sophie, his beautiful, perceptive daughter, understood that. As they walked back through Pripyat's empty streets toward the checkpoint, Sophie asked one more question. "Daddy, if you could go back to before all this happened, would you still sell Grandpa's tools and fly to Ukraine?" Marcus looked back at the city, the crumbling buildings, the rusted Ferris wheel, the forest slowly reclaiming what humans had abandoned. He thought about the year of struggle and danger and exhaustion. He thought about the threats, the fear, the nights he'd been certain he was in over his head. But he also thought about Irina's letter, about Petro's memorial, about Mikhail's crayon drawing, about 3,000 families who finally had support and answers and justice, about Dimitri's life, work finally meaning something, about becoming a man his daughter was proud of. "Yeah," he said, "I'd do it all again, every bit of it, because that was the truth. The whole, complete, undeniable truth." Marcus Reed had been given a second chance at life, and he'd taken it, had fought for it, had transformed it into something that mattered not just to him, but to thousands of people who'd been forgotten by history. The broken veteran had become a guardian of truth. The desperate man who couldn't afford his daughter's birthday present had given away nearly $300 million to help strangers. The failure had become a symbol of redemption. And it had all started with a 75-cent stamp on a letter from a lawyer in Kiev, offering an inheritance no one else wanted. A ghost city with secrets buried in its bones, and one man's lifetime mission, waiting for someone brave enough to finish it. As Marcus and Sophie passed through the checkpoint, leaving the exclusion zone behind, Marcus realized something profound. He hadn't inherited property or money, or even evidence. He'd inherited purpose. And that was worth more than all the gold in Pripyat's vaults. Anyone can find treasure if they're lucky enough. But Marcus Reed had done something far more valuable. He'd turned treasure into justice, inheritance into legacy, and a life that felt worthless into one that had changed the world. The Marine who'd thought his best days were behind him had discovered that sometimes your greatest mission comes when you least expect it. Sometimes the broken pieces of your life are just raw material waiting to be rebuilt into something beautiful. And sometimes the person everyone underestimated turns out to be exactly who the universe needed. Marcus Reed was that person. And his story was just beginning. The ghost city that broke Marcus Reed also rebuilt him, transforming hidden gold into healing, buried secrets into justice, and a forgotten veteran into an unforgettable voice for those who'd suffered in silence for 37 years. Because for Marcus, and for everyone whose lives he touched, the greatest inheritance isn't what you receive, it's what you choose to do with it. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories of courage, redemption, and second chances are waiting for you. Click to keep discovering with us. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe even the most broken among us can become heroes when given the chance to serve something greater than ourselves.